Today, as part of our Business Spotlight program, I'm with Ronan O'Brien. He's the owner of Zatori Results Limited, and he's a serial entrepreneur. So over to you, Ronan. What is it you do, and for how long have you been doing it?
So Zatori runs e-commerce companies. So within that, there's a kind of a group of different e-commerce businesses. So the costume shop.ie is fancy dress. We do Halloween costumes, Christmas costumes, St. Patrick's Day, all the kind of birthday celebrations. I've got buytrophies.ie. It does trophies and medals. So we supply all the multinationals, all the schools, a lot of the DA clubs and sports teams. And we do trophies and awards for corporates and individuals and sports clubs. And then the last one of the three would be the mobility shop. It's a medical company. We do wheelchairs, mobility scooters. We do crutches and walking aids and daily living aids, just make people's life a little bit easier if they're sick at the time or if they're getting a little bit more elderly.
Very good. Okay, excellent. And how long have you been doing that then, Ronan?
So I started the first business in around 2007. So I've been at it a while, coming up on 17, 18 years now. I'm a bit old hat in the situation, but I have to say I still love it every day.
Fantastic, fantastic. And you've been growing obviously in that time. What do you attribute your growth to?
It comes down to focus, to be honest with you. If you know where you're going and then put a plan together and work backwards, that's kind of the way I usually approach it. Um,
Fantastic.
I spend a lot of time constantly educating myself up and constantly reading. And as long as you know what you're trying to achieve, you don't get lost in the weeds. So taking the time to step out. For example, about 3 years ago, we put a CEO in place of me to run the business on a day to day, which then brings me back to a more strategic role so that I can extract myself from more of the day to day to focus on the growth.
Yeah,
Because that really is the key, and that's the leadership role of the owner. It's not necessarily to be the leader; it's to surround yourself with the right people and put the right people in the right positions, and then focus in on the vision, mission, and goals of the company.
fantastic. Yeah, we coach that very strongly with all of our clients. You're ahead of us there. If you had to start from square one in business again, what would you do differently?
Well, in some ways, I have no regrets, and then in other ways, if I was to start again, I'd do it all completely differently, because I've learned those lessons, and I don't need to learn those lessons. And I think one of the joys and heartaches of being a business owner is that the journey and the learnings that go with it. So, I mean, if I was starting again, I'd probably be based more up in Dublin. We're based down in Portlaoise in the Midlands for the fulfillment centres that we have.
Hmm.
Um, I would be looking at ticket prices of €250 plus per item, whereas we're selling medals at €1.99 or 99 cent for some of them, and it's a lot more difficult to make 250 if you've got to sell 250 people on a medal for their child. Of course, there is people that are paying thousands for large corporates, and but yeah, I'd certainly look at higher ticket prices, maybe a less product intensive company. I think that's becoming even more difficult in this world. So I'd probably be looking at maybe one of the next companies I might do as a fintech. And I'd love to go back to my kind of early 20s and just go straight into those kind of businesses that I'm excited about now. But if I could add the energy I had when I was younger to some of the things I'm working on now, I think that would be an awful lot of fun.
Okay, fantastic. And what I think you've touched on it a bit, but what have been your biggest learnings? What have been the biggest learnings as an employer since you started business?
So I've made all the mistakes, okay? Like
Okay.
all of them. Anything you've ever heard in a coaching session, I've been there, I've done it. And in some ways, that's my war chest, and that's how I've kind of created, a million ways to do it wrong. So I found the one way to do it right. I think in business, hiring is the most paramount thing, and I've made some terrible mistakes in that respect that are huge, regrets or just slow you down from growing a business because it just sucks your focus away from what you're trying to do. So I put a lot more effort into to checking the people have the qualifications they say they do and making sure that they're the right fit, the right person on the right bus at the right time. And I wish I knew some of the lessons that I know now when I was starting off, because I started the business for a bet. It wasn't like I sat down with a huge business plan and, like everything they teach you in business school. It wasn't like that at all. It was really kind of a bunch of lads saying, look, we need to do this. I was a DJ at the time in like some major nightclubs, and we wanted to run a massive Halloween event. We said, look, we know this is going to be sold out. So there might be 4,000 people arriving to a venue that can only fit 2,000 people on Saturday night, and I'd be the main act. And we said, look, instead of just turning away half the people, we'll turn away anyone that doesn't show up in a costume, but we'll run posters in advance of the people that do get in so that they know they're in the know. If they show up without a costume, they're not getting through the door. And then we said, well, where are we going to source the costumes? And then out of that, conversation came and said, look, we could start a business around that. So I started with a partner, and my partner then didn't want to work the bank holiday weekend before Halloween and hadn't put all the money in. I'd been in a position where I could put all the money, which was mostly credit card debt, if I'm honest with you. And he said he wasn't going to work and he didn't want to do this, and he didn't realize it'd be evenings and weekends as well as during the day. And I was working full time on a telecom company that I owned at the time. And so it was kind of a bit crazy of time. So he walked away. I wanted to remain friends. So I said, look, I'll take on all the debt. You give up your equity. And he was delighted to get the out. And then we pushed through. And so like that's how it started. It wasn't sitting down going, "Do you know what, there's a huge market gap and the penetration is this and the optimized competition look is and all these charts." It really wasn't like that. We knew that there was a feeling for it at the time. People were still wearing black bags as the default Halloween costume. And I think over the years in that industry now, we've shifted it in Ireland to the point where if you show up to a Halloween party not dressed up, you're the odd one out. Whereas before, if you would put the effort in to get a costume or make your own costume, which was kind of the only choice, you were the odd one out. And I love that shift now to fun. And I always say, just to finish on this one, that if you're having kind of a Halloween party or a fancy dress party in general, it's an office party, for example. If you're Superman, you're going to go over and talk to Wonder Woman. It doesn't matter if she's in accounts and you hate accounts because you're marketing. You're basically boyfriend and girlfriend for the next 2 hours, and it brings down barriers. And it's a good bit of like, it's a bit of joy, a bit of fun, and it's a nice business to be in that respect.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I think you've touched on it as well, but your biggest learnings as an employer, since you began in business, what have they been?
Yeah, so I did touch on. I think the hiring thing is huge. I think getting the right team in the right like seats, and you can have a great person that's just not in the right role or was in the right role, but then got a bit fed up, or you can hire somebody that maybe has the best qualifications, but they're immediately looking for a different job, and then upset every day and taking days off and telling you they're sick, or even being honest with you and saying, "Look, I'm off for another interview." But then they come back and they're disappointed that they don't get it. And after a few months of this, it can affect the culture because they're leaving all day. They think they're better than the business. And that's not their fault. To be clear, that was my fault because I hired someone who had gone through and got their qualifications and had a salary vision much higher than what the role that they were hired for.
Hmm.
So great person, just on the wrong seat on the right bus, but we didn't have that opportunity and salary band where they wanted to be, and they sucked the culture out of it. And I kind of kept letting it go, and I should have just said, "Look, this isn't right. Let's call it early." So I think the other thing is, if it's not working, there's very nice ways to say, "Look, you're not thriving here. You can thrive somewhere else. Let's talk about how that can work." And I suppose the other thing to say is, at this moment in time where we're probably going to air this, there's a lot of job losses going to be happening, a lot more than people anticipate, and it's going to
Okay.
get a little bit worse. And we're replacing a lot of things, not in my organization, but in the economy with AI, and it's going to feel bad. But when you talk to somebody that has been let go at the time, it's the worst thing in the world. Their world is crumbling down. Their self-worth is falling through the floor. And then they immediately find another job, or they find another job in a couple of weeks or a couple of months' time. And it's the best thing that ever happened because they got that time off to reflect. So I think in Ireland, we've made it so difficult to let people go, so upsetting if they do, so negative to go through the experience. And I think there's another way. I don't think it has to be like that. I think you can do it in a very nice way of saying, look, you've learned a lot, but you're not learning anymore here. You're not happy here anymore. How do we transition together so we both get what we want? And that's the best way to do it if you can do it that way. So, yeah, I think that's a really, really big learning. It took me a long time to understand because as an owner, you're putting your hand in your pocket to pay someone severance, and to be generous with that severance sometimes means you're not taking a wage next month. And nobody will understand that if they're not an owner. And to come to terms with they're not supposed to, that's not their job. I think that's really important that you're saying, look, I don't need to explain myself to you. You do what you think is right, but you try to do it in the most ethical, honest, and fair way to everybody involved. And if you've made a mistake or if someone's not working out, you have to look at it as extreme ownership. You're the decision maker, you're the boss, you're the person that hired the person that made the decision if you didn't make the decision, because our organizations get bigger over time. You put levels of management in place and you ask them to make decisions and you empower them to do it. But if they make the wrong decision, well, that's a second tier decision that you've made wrong. So if you can own it that way and say, do you know what? There's a great book actually. I love reading Extreme Ownership from Jocko Willink. So people that
Mhm.
like kind of the army stories, this guy's special forces, and he's a bit of a celebrity online, I suppose, nowadays. But I love that kind of the dichotomy of leadership and the extreme ownership, the two books that he has talking about, look, even if you didn't make the mistake, own the mistake and move forward, because that's the best way to get through the barrier and on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that possibly answers your question to the best of my ability.
No, no, fantastic. And I think the phrase that we have is, you hire slow and fire fast. It's,
Yeah, and that varies because I suppose as an entrepreneur, I have a fast velocity of running a business. And I think the faster you run a business and make decisions and I'll make decisions really falls into how fast you grow. So there is this bit of you can't have indecision, you have to go and make decisions.
yep,
But I think references are becoming more and more important.
yep,
The world where employees think references are less and less important. The one
right.
thing I give advice to people that aren't business owners is never leave on bad terms if you can. Because having had difficult situations in my life, I'm looking up things like going on LinkedIn and seeing are they still connected with their old manager, trying to talk to their old management, trying to see someone in their organization that I can have a connection to.
Yeah.
Because there is scenarios where people, completely make up their history, their education, the whole lot.
Yeah, yeah.
You wouldn't believe, I mean, some of the stories, I think one in the public domain at the moment, was that we hired somebody that went to an Ivy League college and did a course there and never did. And the whole House of Cards was based on the fact that, you'd done this. And of course, they come in and they spend their entire well, at least more than half the time on stress leave because they don't know how to do the job and it's stressful for them, but all based on this one first point of principle where we thought they were highly educated because that was the ruse they were playing in order to get the role. And I think, if we'd taken twice as long to vet, we might have done better, but we did do everything right. We rang the numbers that were on the CV. We did everything right. And we still haven't worked out how those numbers verified the details that were on the CV, but it wasn't true in the end of the day. So
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
very
No,
important to get it right.
I've seen some clients being burnt by that now and again. Hopefully not that often, but it can happen. I suppose the other one then is how do you balance your personal life with the de demands of running a business or many businesses in your case?
You do it very fast. I think that's the answer is I think there's this lovely idea that people work really fast in work and then slow down in the evenings. I am the opposite. I work really hard and then I play really hard. And when the good times are there, I make them great. And then I put extra hours into the work to allow me to do that. So rather than spending 2 hours queuing up in Legoland or Disneyland, I'm taking the fast pass. That kind of way. I'm getting 5 times as much rides in for the day. I'm not sitting around waiting. And that's an absolute privilege to do. But I only get that because there's nights where I'm staying up to 4 and 5 in the morning in the office, pumping through the work that just needs to get done by certain deadlines. And that
Okay.
I'm keeping an eye on all the different businesses and all the different deadlines and all the different targets. And the goals are non-negotiable in our business. They have to be met. So if that means pulling an all-nighter once in a while, you do that. And it's getting harder for me as I'm in my 40s now. It was kind of a weekly thing in my 20s. I try to do a lot less now. But I think it's really important to have a balance, first of all, but also to realize that that balance doesn't mean, you go home and switch off at 6 o'clock. It's not practical for me. It's not what I want to do. I don't want to be on a golf course. I'd much rather be in the office than in a golf course, but I'd also be much rather be with my kids. So, a typical kind of evening would be maybe I finish work at 5:30. If I'm working from home, straight to the pool, have a swim, straight into the restaurant with the kids, have a lovely meal. They get to choose the restaurant, and they're still back in bed at 8 o'clock. And we'll read a book and we'll watch a little thing, and they'll be asleep by 7:30. And then I'll be back down to my home office and I'll get another 6 hours of the work done.
Well,
So that's the reality of when you're under pressure and you have to do that and you have to do certain deadlines. But in those hours of swimming and being with the family, I get more. utility, I think about this best word, than somebody who arrives home, puts on Netflix, ignores the kids, has a takeaway delivered, eats in front of the TV, not physically talking to them. Because, it's quality of time over quantity of time. It's quality of friends. It's quality of people you hang around with.
Yeah.
I hang around in particular with an awful lot of entrepreneurs. I think it's really important to surround yourself with other people's on the journey. It's one of my big advices to business owners who may be listening is like there is the cliche, you are who you hang around with,
Yeah.
but it's so true, and nobody can kind of relate. It's very difficult to relate to your friends because oh, you think you're better than everyone, bossing everyone around, you're the boss. It's like, first of all, it's not like that. Everyone brings you your problems. The job of the CEO is to hire really smart people, and when they can't do it, they bring you the problem and you have to do it. That's literally the job spec. And I hang around with an awful lot of, say, EY's Entrepreneur of the Year community. I was on the board for that for years. I was a finalist in 2012. A gang of us are just back from a trip over to Tenerife for one of the boys' birthdays, and there's a big gang of girls and guys that go away on a very regular basis. We'll be going to Japan. I think about 120 entrepreneurs going every year. The EY, the accounting firm, organize a retreat. And it's unbelievable. Like, it's unbelievable the education you're getting. We've been to Harvard, we've been to Stanford, we've been to Notre Dame. We get access to these colleges where we can, upskill our education and then hang around with other people that have been on the journey. And, I remember one time when I was talking to a business owner, I said, look, I've been struggling with this particular issue. And I'm sure as a business coach, this is your bread and butter. People go, I'm just stuck on this one thing. And this is why business coaches exist. And this is why, older, more mature, experienced entrepreneurs mentor younger entrepreneurs. Because the guy I was explaining to goes, oh, I've seen that. Just do ABC. And I was like, no, 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 it's 9 months. I can't sleep at night. I'm really stressed and worried. ABC, and went back to the office, 9 o'clock A, 10 o'clock B, C. I rang him at 12, said, I can't believe everything is completely sorted. It was 9 months of staying up at night. And he just goes, Ronan, I've seen this so many times before. And you think it's about you. You think you've done something wrong. I promise you it's not. They're just thinking about themselves. You're thinking about yourselves, and neither of you have swapped shoes. And I think that's just such a key element of doing kind of networking, but doing it in a certain way as well. Like, we run masterminds amongst a bunch of entrepreneurs that we meet up every 3 months, and we work as a virtual board for each other. So
Fantastic.
there's a criteria to get in. We all would have boards of directors and stuff like that. But this is a board where there's no vested interest. No one owns each other's companies. No one's getting a salary. And we say, look, if you were the CEO of my company, or if you were the me in my company, what decisions would you make? Who would you call? What would your next steps be? What would you research? And it's the most single powerful thing I do. And the reason is, people are saying, well, I call this guy, here's his phone number, and I'll give you an introduction. Well, I'd read this book because I think it's exactly the challenge you're dealing with. Well, I'd actually do the opposite, and we'd have an argument over why we do that. And the person doesn't have to take any of the advice. But if he knows he's got 50 options versus his, head was in the sand and didn't know what way to go, it's incredibly liberating.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's always multiple solutions to any challenge. It's just to find the one that suits best.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, I suppose we've touched again a bit on it, but what qualities do you look for in employees, and how do you foster a positive and productive work environment?
So I'll hire for attitude every day, right? It's the enthusiasm, it's the attitude. I think I was giving a talk about this recently, and not to go off in too much of a tangent, but we often talk about EQ, and so
Yeah.
emotional quotient, how smart they are, and then IQ, your intelligent quotient. So, you've got your Mensa people, the really smart computer scientists and stuff like that, and the lesser of the three that no one really talks about is the LQ, which is the ability to learn. So your learning quotient. And for me, that's probably the most important. Sure, there's a bare minimum. You need to be smart. You need to have some level of IQ. Not always for all the jobs. We have warehouse jobs, and you don't need to be a rocket science for that. There's jobs out there for everything, but you need to be as smart as the role requires. And
Mhm.
often people get cross at the role, not the person, and people take that personally. And the EQ, are they able to be in a room with people? Do they have social skills? Because you can be as smart and as, ability to learn, but if you're the one person in the office killing the culture and nagging everyone and making everyone else miserable, then that's not okay. So you have to kind of suss out somebody. What are they like? from an EQ point of view. But the LQ is so important to me. So I can teach you what you need to know to run my business. I can teach anybody any of the roles on my bus because I sit in all of them all the time. And I don't hire until I've got the role done, documented it, and I know personally how to do that. Now that might sound very grandiose because there is roles around legal and there is roles around accounting, and I'm not pretending that I know the answer. But then when I'm hiring somebody, even if you're a qualified solicitor, I'm not expecting you to know 100% of the answer. It's perfectly acceptable saying, do you know what? I'm going to have to go and research that. I'm going to have to read my colleagues. I'm going to have to get a second opinion. But I need to know that they know where they're going. But the ability to learn and say, do you know what? I don't know, and I am going to learn this, or I'm going to sit down and watch it. Often when I'm training people, because what we do is obviously e-commerce and it's very technical, I'll record the screens while I'm sitting beside them, or if we're doing a Zoom like this, I'll record the screens and I'll give them access to it in a wiki on an internal database. So
Mhm.
they can go back and say, I don't really understand that meeting. I wish you could explain to me again. And I don't have to sit through that again. They can go back and have the meeting with me when
Mhm.
I'm not there. And they can actually go and see other people's meetings with me and say, oh, this is when he trained someone to do an upload. Oh, this is when he trained why we do a certain thing regarding, digital marketing or ads or something like that. And so that creates a data bank and multiples of me without sucking my time in, because the thing I'm trying to be precious about is my time.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. No, so you've sort of frequently asked questions, I suppose, I'm training. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's role specific as well, and I can kind of point to it going, remember we had this meeting and remember like this, can you go over that document again, the meeting from Thursday 3 weeks ago? Can you just rewatch that? Because I think you didn't fully take it in and then come to me with the solution. So that's another thing. If people come to me with a problem rather than, and this was really hard because when I was the CEO and I stepped down, people would still come to me and say, hey, listen, I've got this thing. And I'd have to go, okay, well, what's the answer? And they'd say, oh, I thought you'd do it for me. I was like, no, you're gonna have to come with a suggestion. And to be honest with you, like that's a CEO problem. So you should be going to our CEO first and then coming to me. And it wasn't because I was not interested in solving the problem. Of course, I could tell them the answer straight away, but then they'd keep bringing me the problems. So by structuring then one-on-ones every week or two, initially people would have these problems that they normally have brought to me, and then they document them, they come up with a potential solution. And by the time the week had rolled around to see me, they'd already solved the problem and they didn't need me. And it was incredibly freeing to realize I actually wasn't that important and that these people were a lot smarter than they thought they were,
Yeah.
because they could solve their own problems if they said, well, what's he going to say? And am I going to wait 5 days to get that answer? Or will I just get on and solve it?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's
No,
important.
I remember hearing it first a long time ago when I was training, and well, I'm training all the time, like yourself, and learning and reading. But I remember seeing a guy coaching. They were doing a coaching session, and the coachee said, "I don't know." And then the coach said, "Well, if you did know, what would it be?" And I'm just amazed how many times that works.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I think we always know the answer. And the other thing is that there can be several answers and they can all be right,
Yeah,
that kind of way.
yeah.
So I think it's really important that people don't get like stuck in the weeds on these things and have the conversations. But again, like we always ask people in our business to come to us with a business case and a reason why and a problem statement and a
Mhm.
suggestion. Even if they don't know the answer, just come up with a suggestion. Because
Mhm.
while they're thinking of that one suggestion, they're going to think of five different alternatives to choose one to put forward. And they
Yeah.
might then put down the second, and then they might give an A, B scenario, and then the answer. And a lot of the time in business, there's a natural answer as you go through the journey of the question. So what you're trying to do there is you're trying to elevate people. You're trying to teach them as you go, how would I make this decision? How could you make this decision? Do you need me for this decision? What's the aspect? And while it does take a little bit longer in the first instance, you then empower them and give them permission to make mistakes, and the organization grows. And even if they do leave, that's fine because they've left saying, "Do you know what? I learned an awful lot there and I accelerated my career on." And you've got those systems that you're bringing along the next person. So there's constant growth
Yeah.
within your organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely gold. All of that. Ronan, I suppose just to finish up, what are some common misconceptions about running a business, and how do you address them?
So first of all, I don't address them if the person doesn't want to hear the answer. So it's something I'm very passionate about is I don't explain how something works if somebody doesn't want to know how it works.
Hmm.
And I think that's the problem where someone wants to defend themselves, or if they don't want to hear your answer, you just say, look, what is it? Like, why are you coming to this misconception? And to be honest with there's loads depending on, who's bringing you the problems. But the one I seem to come across all the time is that the misconception that just because the money goes over the till, the business owner is loaded. And I was talking to somebody there recently about the mechanic company that rents a building that I own beside our offices. And I pointed out that these guys are amazing. Like they work really long hours. And the guy said to me, yeah, but sure, they're earning €45 an hour. That's a great salary. And I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" I said, well, I had to pay €90 and it only took them 2 hours. And I said, but that doesn't mean the employee gets paid the €90. Like that goes into the business, and there's that, and there's, such and such. And hopefully it didn't take them 2 hours, because they're losing money if it did. And the cogs in the brain were just like, oh, I thought that goes directly to the mechanic. I said, well, where would the rent come from? Where, all the overhead. So there is that misconception that just because
Hmm.
there's velocity of money doesn't mean that there's EBITDA, and EBITDA has to be protected and has to be looked after for the customer as well as for the owner. Because if you're not around in 3 years to
Exactly.
service the mobility scooter that you've done,
Mm.
that you've sold them, then that's a terrible outcome for the customer, because they should have it for 10 years if it's looked after. But if you sell it at such a low price that you're not able to service it, or you're not able to pay a qualified person to be on call when it goes down, because they obviously rely on their electric wheelchairs and things like that, you have to have these people on standby. So it can be a little bit expensive. So I don't try to explain to people why it costs what it costs to run my business, for example. I just saying, look, this is the price, and you have to do. We do our very best, in all the circumstances, to be very fair. But I don't think it's important if someone has a misconception and they don't want to know the answer. It's not your job to explain it to them.
Oh,
But the big one is they assume that if they pay you €100, you put €100 in your pocket and you go down to the pub and you have €100 of a night out. And
yeah.
no matter how often I've explained it to people, I still hear new people coming with that
No,
issue.
I think it's a lost cause trying to explain to an employee what that
Not
concept.
necessarily an employee. I mean, and obviously there's many employees that do get it right. I think, the customers as well, would be, very unaware of, so an example would be we'd be sending thousands and thousands of parcels at Halloween. And someone say, oh, I've changed my mind. I want the same product in a blue instead of a red. And you're like, look, that was dispatched 8 hours ago and it's now on a 40-foot truck. And they're like, okay, can you just take that truck apart and go searching for my item? And you're like, look, the item was €1.99, and that would take me 50 people 6 hours to, go through each and every one. Whereas you could just buy the other unit for €1.99, and that's a negative review on Google, which is, very detrimental and upsets the staff, frankly. But there's nothing you can do in those circumstances, and explaining it to them, they just think, oh, you don't want to help me, or this kind of thing. You'll make my child cry. And you're like, look, at the end of the
Oh my
day,
gosh.
we've
Yeah.
done what we think is our best, but can we spend 7 hours or 10 hours, looking for a 199 item because you've had a change of heart? No mistakes have been made.
Mm.
And the answer is, you don't explain.
There's always going to be something. I mean, I know our net promoter score globally was just published. It was 87%, which we were delighted with. It had moved up and all that. There's still 13% don't regard us as fantastic, But hey, you got to go with the
But
majority.
again, I think if you look at some of those like scores and reviews, like, we get reviews, excellent, 4 stars, and you kind of, well, that drags down our 4.8 average significantly. We've got to get about 200 or maybe 100 5-star reviews to offset your one 4-star review. And when you talk to the people that do, because a friend of mine did this, and I
Mm.
was like, "Give me 4 stars instead of five." I never give anyone 5 stars. 5 stars is perfection, and it's something people should strive to achieve. And and I was just kind of going, oh God, like it's such an important thing. And look, here's the other thing: if you're a business owner listening, if you've got friends that are in business, or if you're a small business, do give them like, it's better than a tip. Give them a 5-star review to say, "Do you know what, we appreciate," because it really does help the businesses. And go out and support your local businesses. Like, go out, and if someone's starting a business, be their first customer. It's my favorite thing to do. If someone's opening any business at all, I'll try to find a way to either be their customer, or I'll pay for someone else to be their customer, just so I can kind of go, let's get them a leg up. And it's those things that really do matter. because you always remember your first customer. And as I said, I start new businesses all the time. And I remember running in and saying, "Oh, yes, we got our first client." And it was €50 sale. And I was over the moon. Someone said, "Look, we've done 20, 30,000 today on another business." Yeah, but we got our first one for €50, and I wasn't interested in the other one at all. And by all
Mm,
means, I was delighted with the person that made the sale for the other businesses. Like it wasn't that. It was just like, no, that's the first one. They're the ones that matter.
I
So I
couldn't.
think, yeah, I think people maybe misconceive how important the small things are, and
Interesting.
the
Interesting.
little thank yous and the appreciations, I think, are very important.
Fantastic, fantastic. Listen, Ronan, there's a wealth of stuff there for our viewers, and I really appreciate your time on taking the time out when in a very busy schedule. But again, thanks very much.
No problem. Thanks very much. Bye.